Former President Donald Trump has been a huge critic of President Joe Biden's handling of Afghanistan. And of course, look, what was going on, at least in the exit of Afghanistan, heartbreaking. I've showed you videos of desperate people trying to flee the country after the Taliban took over. Now, on Sunday, Trump called on President Biden to, quote, resign in disgrace over his handling of the withdrawal and, of course, other issues that he throws in. He said, it is time for Joe Biden to resign in disgrace for what he has allowed to happen in Afghanistan. Now, that is referring, of course, to the incredibly fast Taliban takeover, which seemed to take everybody in the media and by Washington, in Washington by surprise. For me, I'm not really all that surprised. I mean, it's what happens when a puppet state, the puppeteer in this case, which would be the United States, leaves the puppet government. Of course, it's going to fall on its own. It never had any support. And of course, Joe Biden is rightly getting attacked, I think, for saying, things like, oh, there's going to be no circumstance where you're going to see people being lifted off the roof. He set up Afghanistan. All right. Yeah, look, that's exactly what happened. There's no ifs, ands, and buts around it. Yes, that's exactly what happened. And yes, a lot of people are referring to it as the Saigon moment. And so, all right, it was a disaster. Now, his predictions, incredibly incorrect, and I think there's a good reason for that. And this is something that both Biden and Donald Trump actually seem to agree on. In fact, recently, Trump was on Sean Hannity's program on Fox News, and here's what he said about it.
Just one thing, and I have to say, and this is different from everyone else, I said, why are they fighting? Why are these Afghan soldiers fighting against the Taliban? And I was told some very bad information by a lot of different people. The fact is, they're among the highest paid soldiers in the world. They were doing it for a paycheck because once we left, they stopped fighting. So all of the people that talk about the bravery and everything, I say everybody's brave. But the fact is, our country was paying the Afghan soldiers a fortune. So we were sort of bribing them to fight. And that's not what it's all about.
Whoa. Whoa. Of course, the usual Trumpisms mixed in, but it's actually right. I mean, oh, I say everybody's brave. They talk about the brave. But no, he's actually right, though. I mean, hey, when you're right, you're right. That said, all right, that doesn't mean that Trump was right about all the other stuff. And the fact that, oh, this is the worst thing ever. It's the most embarrassment I've ever seen. And that everything is Joe Biden's fault. No. Actually, you both share in both the credit in leaving Afghanistan, which I agreed with, but also in the blame of how it was executed. And that, again, is incredibly fair to point out how both administrations did fail on having a coherent exit that made sure to take care of our allies and people like interpreters that worked with us, as well as, Afghan civilians who were fleeing the Taliban, not being able to get those people out, as well as American citizens. But again, look at what he said, and I think it was really, really interesting. The accidental insight. He said, I got some bad information from many people. Many people. Well, what he's talking about is the intelligence, the same intelligence that Joe Biden also received when it came to Afghanistan. So understand, they both received the same information. That same information the mainstream media also knew and reported on, and that intelligence happened to be faulty. Because, as I pointed out before, I think that this whole thing is because it's like a mix of hubris, the establishment bubble, the American exceptionalism, and we think that we're absolutely the best in the world, and everything that we do is fantastic, that we know everything, that we're better than everybody else, we're smarter, we're better. We're the only ones that could have tamed Afghanistan or civilized it and turned it into a functional democracy run by us. And understand that right there is the colonial imperialist mindset. So understand, that's a thing. And look, that thing proved to be incredibly false. as we no doubt have seen, and this isn't the first time that we have had major intelligence failures related to Afghanistan, but also in Iraq with the weapons of mass destruction that actually weren't there. And then, just the whole string of failures when it came to both Iraq and Afghanistan. But let's go to Biden here, who actually, once again, Trump had echoed. So Biden said it in an obviously more sophisticated way. Here's what he said. We spent over $1 trillion over 20 years. We retrained and equipped with modern equipment over 300,000 Afghan forces, and Afghan leaders have to come together. I'll insist we continue to keep commitments we made, providing close air support, making sure that their Air Force functions and is operable, resupplying their forces with food and equipment, and paying for their salaries, but they have got to want to fight. So that really is sort of the same thing. They've got to want to fight. All the equipment in the world is not going to matter if they don't want to fight for, quote unquote, their country, right? So both Biden and Trump are correct, and that the Afghan forces literally had no will to fight the Taliban. They had no loyalty to the U.S. puppet government in the region, and it turns out they were actually more mercenaries than anything, and without the United States there to prop that up, they weren't really fighting for anything. And what were they fighting for? They were fighting for a paycheck. And it wasn't, again, the Afghan government that we created. It wasn't President Ashraf Ghani, who apparently fled with like millions of dollars and is now sitting in the United Arab Emirates. No, this was a paycheck. Understand that in Afghanistan, they really don't have the same sense of national identity that a country like America has, right? And so there's no national identity really to spur the people on to fight, at least in the case of, once again, a puppet government. I think they have more of a regional sort of mentality when it comes to it. Or, just the desire to kick out people who have been invading in their country for 20 years or occupying their country for 20 years. But anyway, so what's interesting about that is the lesson, right? So now Biden gets it. Now Trump gets it. Again, that's why they both wanted to pull out of Afghanistan. What we were doing wasn't working. But understand that we've done this before. We should have learned this before. Vietnam. That lack of will to fight on our behalf, and that's really what it is why the Vietnamese army was able to win. The North Vietnamese, or just Vietnamese army, not even army, farmers. That's how they were able to rout the U.S. military. They actually wanted to fight. They actually cared about what they were fighting about. That matters. That matters. And they ended up defeating the largest, most advanced military in the world. So, yeah, you can't fight another country's civil war, especially when the side you're on doesn't even want to win. That is very true. Very true. But again, here's the thing. As I pointed out in another segment that I put out yesterday, the people in charge, the generals, previous presidents, corporate media, they are pro-war and pro-imperialism. And that's because there is an entire industry built around war. And for the industry, it's important to look at the industry through a different lens. Again, we will look at it as like, well, oh boy, that was a failure. Wow, that sucked. But for the industry, this was a win. They made bank. They made billions of dollars. Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. They all made a killing, literally, by using government contracts. Not to mention these defense contractors. They often hire ex-military government members to be parts of their corporate boards. This is the military-industrial complex. Add in the media, of course, that cheers on wars, because when there's a war, when there's a conflict, well, guess what? Their ratings go up. And in a lot of cases, you also have politicians that tend to win during times of conflict because, you remember all the discussion about Bush, during 2004, during that election, where we got to stay the course. We got to stay the course. You don't just, change horses midstream. You got to vote for Bush. Vote for Bush. And that's what happened. And so they stayed with Bush. But understand, too, like that patriotism, that increased level of patriotism that there are during certain conflicts, it really does help them. Plus the money that's flowing around to everybody. And it's really easy to see why we're constantly doing endless war. Which is why, again, I think Joe Biden, Donald Trump actually did the right thing in doing Afghanistan. Again, you can criticize the way that, that it was actually executed and pulled out. I understand that. I get it. That said, let's go to Donald Trump being a little bit petty about it. He said, it's an embarrassment how we left. Oh, I would have left bigly. It would have been the most tremendous, best exit anyone's ever had. I don't actually think it would have been any different. The Taliban still would have taken over because the main reason they both agreed on, and of course the way that it was done. In fact, here's what Biden said. He said, when I came to office, I inherited a deal cut by my predecessor, which he invited the Taliban to discuss at Camp David on the eve of 9/11 of 2019. That left the Taliban in the strongest position militarily since 2001 and imposed a May 1st, 2021 deadline on U.S. forces. So they knew, they knew when the United States was going to leave, and of course they planned around it. Shortly before he left office, he also drew U.S. forces down to a bare minimum of 2,500. Again, I agreed with that decision. Therefore, when I became president, I faced a choice, follow through on the deal with a brief extension to get our forces and allies out safely, which again, you can point out he largely failed to do, and ramp up our presence and send more American troops to fight once again in another country's civil conflict. I was the fourth president to preside over an American troop presence in Afghanistan, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I would not and will not pass this war to a fifth. And that, of course, is the important thing about this, is that he did follow through and did not decide to continue this endless fight in another country's civil war. And again, that is the correct choice. And you can criticize Biden's execution of the pullout and of the bad predictions and of the even based on the terrible intelligence that they had. You can even talk about good old American exceptionalism as being part of that as well, and that's fair. But I don't really think that you can say anybody else would have done better. I'm just saying. This was a situation that I think was almost pretty much unavoidable. It was going to be a disaster. It often is, which is why we shouldn't nation build in the first place. That's why it's always a bad idea to go and do an imperialism on another country. All right? The best thing that we can do now, I think, and this is where Republicans will disagree, is try to expedite the process of getting people who helped us in Afghanistan, and of course taking as many refugees as possible. Already 16 Republicans voted against the expedition of those visas for, again, our allies, people that helped us in Afghanistan. And of course, you've already seen Fox News fear-mongering about Afghan immigrants coming to your town. Oh, they're going to come to your street. They're going to come knock on your door. They're going to jihad you. No. And not only that, but Republicans are completely pointing the finger at Biden. The media is harping on the Saigon moment, while also forgetting that, Trump also shares a little bit of the blame as well as the credit. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a like and share with your friends. You can subscribe and help out the channel by becoming a patron. It's patreon.com/Jeff Waldorf, or you can become a channel member as well by hitting the join button below.